I dreamt we were all beautiful and strong. I wish that was the mantra I had going through my head this week. Instead, the phrase that I've just been having to keep reminding myself of all these past weeks is nothing is normal. Truly, as we are experiencing this global pandemic, there is no such thing as normal. And yet, if you are anything like me, I so often forget that simple thought and phrase, and I use my old lens to evaluate this time. I use it to evaluate myself and to evaluate those around me, and it's not the right lens to be using right now. So just last weekend, I was on several Facebook pages for Unitarian Universalist ministers. They're going crazy right now. Not the ministers, but these pages. And as I read more and more of the postings, I just plunged into this toxic water of comparison. These aren't unfamiliar waters for me. I can sometimes get stuck in that cycle of comparing, but I know that these waters are always futile. My colleagues and I are all learning new ways of online worship and program delivery, and so there's just so much sharing going on. And as I took it all in, I felt myself thinking about how I and we measure up to what's happening in other UU churches, as if church life is ever about measuring up, like somebody's going to come around and judge the competition and give us all ribbons. But if I'm honest, I didn't just fall into the toxic water of comparisons. I took a high leap belly flop, and boy, did it sting. My mind and my body and my spirit like literally ached for a couple days. I just wasn't able to shake the cycle of shoulds and coulds and why didn't you and why can't you and the sadness and even sometimes the shame. And I literally had to be proactive to get myself out of that place. I know some of you have felt the same about some aspects of your lives over these past few weeks. So here's what I noticed. I noticed that negative thinking is ripe when our lives are out of balance and when we are weary. Comparison is a wretched act that ends up with a sense of superiority or inferiority, and honestly, neither is a place where I want to be. We always have the option of looking at the cup as half empty, but we also have the option, but when we do that, we disregard the fact that it's also half full. Standard media and social media, even when it's well-intended, it comes at us at too fast of a pace these days to be able to process what's coming into us with a few clicks or swipes. So I took a deep breath. I decided to take a break from all of the Facebook pages connected to ministry, and instead, I began to think of you. One by one, I imagined your faces, and I acknowledged your stories. As I did that, I was filled with the joy of serving as your minister in this wild journey of shared ministry, held so reverently by so many of you. I let those external stories become quieter than the strong voice of my own intuition and wisdom. I turned the volume up on my own intuition and wisdom, and I allowed the gifts of being part of MSUS community of all ages to be visible and celebrated. And by the time I came home from Wichita, where we picked up my son and I had gone on that little tailspin and belly flop, I decided to hold a coffee house. And eventually, I found my way back to this new normal, which is not normal at all. And I continued to move forward with more self-compassion, as well as a greater joy and gratitude. So much that grounds and connects our individual and communal lives has shifted so drastically. So much has ceased and been taken away, as Leslie was commenting about. As the blessing after the joys and sorrows says, we are staying home, and love has never asked this of us before. The commonality of our lives are the empty streets, the grocery stores with people wearing masks and gloves, folks waiting at the end of the aisle that is too narrow to share, people purposely stepping far out of the way of one another when walking on the streets or parks. I mean, this actually felt quite rude a few weeks ago, and now it feels now it actually feels rude and actually dangerous to not do this action of compassion. We hear stories of crisis within our hospitals and other institutions and our homes that are struck by this illness, and beloved people who struggle for their lives, and those who are helping them, who are also in concern of their own health. And then there's that which is unique to each of us. I've heard from so many of you this week about, there's those of us who live alone and those who live with others. There's those who are financially secure and those who struggle with financial insecurity. And there's those who are connected with loved ones who are ill or dying from COVID-19, or loved ones who are suffering from other health conditions. Even the families who are normally close to us may feel far away, and those who are far away feel like they're on a whole other planet practically. We've come to this extraordinary time with our own unique histories and our traumas, our roles and responsibilities, our own mental and physical health, and so much more. And as I listen to how this shelter in place has impacted each of you, I hear of just vastly different realities. There is so much stress for some, just so much stress. And others are left with more free time, desired or not, and yet restrictions on how that free time can be spent. Nothing's normal. So if you feel off balance and easily irritated and exhausted, scattered, or a deeper level of stress, anxiety, or depression, please know that these are all very natural responses to this abnormal reality we find ourselves in. As author Chuck Wedding says, it's hard to concentrate when everything is so strange, so broken, so dangerous. It's like being told to paint a masterpiece while on a turbulent flight. It's just not the time. Chuck named what I wish I could say to all of you, myself included. He said, it's okay if you can't focus on writing or reading a book or planting a garden or patching drywall or whatever. Find a different thing. Keep busy when you must, but also don't be afraid to sit with how you're feeling and accept it. Accept it unconditionally. Accept your anger and your sadness, accept your delirium. Allow yourself time to drift and to fail. And also accept any joy you feel, and do so without guilt. Joy is hard won, and if you manage that victory, there is no shame in that. Take a victory lap. And then he reminds us of what a tender time this is for all of us. He says, I think most of all, just don't let anybody tell you how to feel. Now, maybe more than ever, don't compare yourself to others. Everyone is not only trapped in their houses, but they're also trapped in their own maelstrom of emotions too. Let that be true. You can talk it out. You can share how you're feeling, but don't compare in a way that punishes you or that paints your own feelings as wrong. A recent article that was making its way into the inbox of UU ministers is titled "The Discomfort That You're Feeling is Grief" by Scott Baronauto. And he reflects on that anticipatory grief that Leslie was talking about, the kind that when your mind goes into the future and it imagines the worst, it catastrophizes. And he encouraged us to work really hard to stay in the present, which is really all that we actually have any control over. And I love this simple technique that he recommends. He says, just take time to look around you and name 5 things in the room where you are. Or if you're outside, name 5 things that are in your view. And then stop and take a deep breath. And if it doesn't work to bring you to the present the first time, then repeat until you feel yourself where you are in this present moment. You all know that it's well known that naming emotions can help them move. He says emotions need motion. Emotions do need motion, and especially now. Bernardo added a 6th stage to the 5 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that many of you are familiar with. He went beyond the final stage of acceptance and added meaning. He said, I didn't want to stop at acceptance when I experienced personal grief. I wanted meaning in those darkest hours. And I do believe we find light in those times. Even now, people are realizing they can connect through technology. We're realizing that we're not as remote as we thought. We're realizing that we can use our phones for conversations. Some of us have known that from the past. They're appreciating walks. And I believe we will continue to find meaning now and when it's over, he says. So I want to close with a brief image provided by Mark Nepo. He's a spiritual author who I find quite wise. In a book titled The Exquisite Risk, Mark reminds us of the old cultural art of storytelling. This cultural art of storytelling was around long before anything was recorded in books, and instead stories were told and retold around fires or on cliffs or in the shade of enormous trees. Mark writes, and it is said that somewhere on the edge of what was known and unknown, 2 people paused in their struggle to survive and faced each other. One asked the other, is there more to this life than hauling wood? And the older of the 2 sighed, yes and no. The riddle of this yes and no offered by the wise one on the edge of what was known and unknown. This is an image of 2 people who pause amidst their struggle to survive. They stop and they face each other so one can ask that age-old existential question of, is there more to life than this? I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a bit of that Groundhog Day movie effect these days. I wake up, I live a day, I go to bed, I repeat. I wake up, I live a day, I go to bed, I repeat. These times can feel burdensome as being stuck in a reality of having, as they must have been felt being stuck in that reality of carrying wood day in and day out. So Mark writes, they say that after a time, the 2 who paused on the edge of what is known and unknown stumbled into humility. Please tell me there is something more to this than hauling wood, the one would ask again. And the more tired of the 2 replied, no, it is all in the hauling, all in the wood, all in how we face each other around the small fires we can build. We're all living in some unknown story right now, one beyond our control and beyond our imagination. And every day we live on that edge of what is known and unknown. Some days we're filled with hope of a vaccine and a break from the shelter-in-place mandate. We imagine our loved ones returning to work and those who are in need of assistance that requires personal contact being able to get what they need. And then other days we anticipate the opposite. Deep fear and anger about how this pandemic has been managed permeates our beings. We open our phones or newspapers or turn on our computers, TVs or radios searching for answers. But really the only thing we know for certain are the numbers reflected in our past and an unknown future. For those not in the center of the crisis, the day-to-day life of being at home and working and parenting and trying to get along with others and managing stress and depression, of literally filling hours and staying present, can feel like a struggle for survival. Carrying wood day after day after day. So let us find meaning in the hauling, find meaning in the wood itself, and pay attention to how we face each other around the small fires that we build. We're living in the midst of a global story, one that will be shared for generations to come. Slow down. Be present. Be kind to yourself and others, even when that feels like heavy lifting. And reach out if you need support. I and we are there to accompany one another as we live on the edge of what is known and what is unknown. May it be so. I want to take a moment to thank Brock for leading the service last week, and I had a chance to listen to your conversation afterwards. You were sharing what you're doing in order to find some balance and to make your way through this time. What I'm curious about is, what are some of the mantras or stories that are defining this time for you? They can be both positive or negative, but as you recall, I opened with nothing's normal, which helps me shift the way that I evaluate my day and my life. It may not feel theological to you, but it somehow opens space for me to recognize that I shouldn't expect of myself or others what I may have expected in the past. So I open conversation for a few minutes to have you share what mantras or stories are defining this time for you, both good or bad, happy or sad. Katie will look for you. You can either raise your hand or write something in the box to the side as we share. Do we have a quiet bunch? I see Katie searching.
Yeah.
I know I am not the only one who wanders through the day trying to get some compass point that helps me stay in this new reality.
I
So
see
maybe
Polly has
it's
something, so I'm gonna
super.
see what she has here. There we go.
I've been saying the serenity prayer a lot, which is, I change it to higher power, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I say that a lot.
Thank you. Janice, I'll unmute you.
Two things have helped me through this. They've helped me through other stressful times as well. I memorized the words to Spirit of Life. And when I'm having difficulty going to sleep, I sing those words to myself. The other one is that there's a, I don't know what you'd call it, it's deep peace. Deep peace of the rolling waves to you. Deep peace of the silent stars. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the silent stars, or the quiet earth, pardon me. May peace, may peace, may peace fill your soul. May peace, may peace, may peace make you whole. There's also arm movements that you can do with it. And I think it is available on YouTube. I always used it at work to kind of de-stress after working on the computer for 4 hours on something that had to be done. So both of those things have been useful for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. It looks like Pamela put in love, deep peace. So maybe that's what it's called. I don't know. And then Stephanie wrote that may I flow like a river and be open to change. Marilyn was saying, as she listens to the news and stories of those who are a voice of calm and reason, such as Governor Cuomo, Dr. Fauci, and Trevor Noah. And then Leslie says, I remind myself to take things one day at a time, which is hard for me to do. Marilyn writes love, And Rebecca writes, I remind myself this too shall pass. Each time a new hurdle presents itself, I say this. And then finally, Leticia writes, lately, I've been trying to catch myself going down the rabbit hole of the worst case scenarios in my mind by reminding myself to be present.
And I have two other electronic hands raised. iPad 2, who I think is Lois, will unmute you.
This is Lois's
Oh, it's
iPad.
But it's
This
Ali.
is Ali. We think of this as a crisis of the world, but it really helps me to remember this is a crisis of humans. And spring has come, the birds are returning, the flowers are returning. There's a lot of life that's springing forth. And it gives me solace to remember that piece. The rest of it is going on. Focus on that piece.
Thank you. And Lynn, I will unmute you.
I've been thinking of my maternal grandmother who was born in 1902 and died in 2002. And she lived through the 1918 flu epidemic. She lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression. She survived all that, raised a family, ran a farm. I'm pretty sure that we could manage this.
Gathering the strength of your ancestors, Lynn. Pamela writes, deep breaths. I'm going to close this section in case anybody, unless anybody has any last piece to add.